There's a whole lot of things I want to tell you about. Adventures, dangerous and queer. Some you could guess, and some I've only hinted at. So please lend me your ear.
Everyone has a relationship with gender. What's your story? Hello and welcome to Gender Stories with your host, Dr. Alex Iantafi.
Hello and welcome to a very special episode of Gender Stories. I know I've had a few episodes with the fabulous Dr. Meg-John Barker. And today it's a special episode because we have a book out, How to Understand Your Relationships. And you also contributed, I know, and if you're on video, you can see Meg-John showing you the book with the beautiful cover by Joel Shield. I wish I could also show you, but I haven't received my copy yet. And we cannot show you the fabulous cover also of Trans and Disabled, which I edited and which Team MJ has got a piece in as well. So welcome, Meg-John. It's so good to see you.
Oh, so good to see you too. Thank you for having us.
Yes. So we were like, we got a book out and then there's another book out. We should do something. And so here we are. I have to say it's been a really weird week for me living in the so-called United States to have two books out. And so I want to be really transparent as I usually am and be like, It feels like, I don't know, it just feels like it's been such a heavy week for a lot of minoritized folks, right? Trans folks, immigrant folks, all the folks are getting targeted by the current regime. But we also want to make sure that people know that the books are out and that actually there might be a good resource during this time. Yeah. How are you doing about this books being out? How do you feel?
Oh, yes. I mean, similar. I feel like I was saying to you actually before we started recording, I've been looking back over old journals and pictures and things, and there's the book of when our first book together came out, How to Understand Your Gender, and there's that picture of us with our book baby, and we're so excited. And I guess, those first few books that came out, they really were kind of celebratory moments. And then, like How to Understand Your Sexuality, we did during lockdown over Zoom. We wrote it. I guess that one and this one have a very different feel here because we've been through this kind of few years of PTSD, and also the world has been going through PTSD too. Can we say that? So it just feels like a very different world. Yeah. So it's not like, I guess we feel, kind of, there's a sort of balance, really. There's maybe a sobriety. It feels like just much more sober, like less of a kind of high that we've got something to celebrate, and more of a sober, which maybe fits the book, because again, like How to Understand Your Sexuality, I guess we're talking, about the pleasure of love and relationships, but we're also talking a lot about trauma and marginalization. I kind of feel that it's that sort of feeling balanced in a way. Like I'm thinking of Inside Out and those balls with the joy and the sadness. It's that.
Yes.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I do think it's a more nuanced book. I think it's also a more vulnerable book. Like we really poured a lot of ourselves in this book and how to understand your relationships. And I'm hoping to do a separate episode for Trans and Disabled with as many contributors as I can gather to have maybe a little round table to discuss people's contributions. So we're going to focus on how to understand your relationships at the moment. But there is also an anthology called Trans and Disabled, which has poems and short stories and kind of essays. So I heartily, is that even a word, enthusiastically recommend the anthology, mostly because even though I have one piece in it, all these other brilliant authors have got pieces in it. And I'm really looking forward to seeing a physical copy out in the world.
It's really, really good. And you put together such an amazing crew of people. But like you say, there's that vulnerability of being so open with these two books. You know, I mean, we always have drawn on our own experience, you know, with gender and sexuality, obviously, and the other two in this series. But yeah, this one really, we are just very open about, how much relationship trauma we ourselves have carried, also the struggles being neurodivergent and having relationships. I think these two books are the first where we're talking about our autism and also our plurality, like very openly. Being really open about being disabled. So that is quite a lot of vulnerability and maybe some new things to share, you know, things that we've only uncovered in the last few years, maybe some of them, and also ones that feel good to be able to talk about, and also a bit vulnerable.
Absolutely. And I think in a way that's the strength of the book. I don't want to be like conceited by talking about the strength of our book, but I do think that one of the things we bring is this like mixture of like scholarship, professional experience also as therapists, and like our personal experiences, right? That kind of, we weave all of those together. And in a way, I don't know about you, but there is like so much vulnerability in talking about relationships because you know, we don't do relationship by ourselves. I know, mind blowing, right? We do relationships with other people. And I'm always like, what if somebody else who knows me is like, you're so full of shit. This is my experience of your relationship with you, right? And there's always this kind of, and I know that's trauma too, right? Yeah. This fear of like, oh, how is this going to land with people? Because, and we say that in the introduction.
Well, yeah.
We did, yeah.
I hope it helps that we're that open about it. It's like, there's no way, you know, this is about as far from the kind of glossy self-help book by the person who says they're an expert on relationships and they've been married 30 years and, you know, have happily married for 30 years or so. It's about as far away from that book as you could possibly get. So at least we're not saying... but like you say, there's such a vulnerability about relationships, and we talk a lot about ruptures and rifts in relationships in the book and just how painful those are. And again, I feel like these last few years, there's been so many more because everybody's trauma has been, you know, up and more uncovered. And there's nothing really for us that's sadder than that territory, which, you know, we have to deal with in the book. And so, it's always tough to know there's people out there with stories about how you hurt them in relationship. And that's part of it. That's part of what we're dealing with here.
Yeah. And I think that's what it's beautiful about the book. It's like, it feels like very radically human. And we're very clear that even though like, we do have what the world might call expertise in air quotes in this area. We're really approaching it as people who know like the joy and pain of relationships, right? That it can be the most wonderful, healing, beautiful thing to be in relationship with one another and with the ecosystem. And it can also be the most heartbreaking, painful thing and all of it at the same time sometimes. And it's complex, and that we are not, by no stretch of the imagination, we have all the answers. It's not one of those that's like,
it's
here's
much
the
more
recipe.
ask the questions. Yeah.
Exactly. But that's what I love about how we write books, that it's not about we're giving you the answers. It's like we're giving you the questions. For me as a therapist, it feels very similar to what I do as a therapist in a way. I get to be here. I have some knowledge. I get to ask questions, but ultimately, you know, people are the authors of their own lives. They get to make their own choices. They get to choose their own values and belief system and relationship containers and the kind of how and with whom they want to engage in relationships. And that is not something that you see often in relationship books. I'm thinking about often it's like, here's how you do monogamy really well. Here's how you do non-monogamy. Here's how you parent. Here's about your relationship with the environment. And I think what we try to do is pretty ambitious because we're like, let's talk about all relationships and how we relate to ourselves and each other and the ecosystem and spirit and ancestors and ourselves as future ancestors. And when I look back, I'm like, wow, that is a tall order. Like, does that make sense? How do you feel about that?
I mean, I remember when we were sort of thinking about this, and Just for you and I, it didn't make any sense, did it, to write? We had to cover all kinds of relationships, so we had to throw the net that wide. I think it was kind of helpful to have that gender and sexualities books first, wasn't it? Because we kind of used the same format as for those. And I think that really is, I don't think people would necessarily think about applying that to relationships. This kind of, how do I understand where I've got to with my gender, with my sexuality? Like, that makes a bit more sense to people. How do I, kind of locate myself with gender and sexuality, and how do I understand how my upbringing has influenced it, and my wider culture has influenced it, and how I want to do it. But actually to have that blueprint and then apply it to relationships gives something pretty unique, as does that insistence that we had of like, we're not just going to deal with obviously not just romantic relationships, but then also not just relationships with adults, then also not just human relationships with other beings, and then like relationship with community, relationship with culture, relationship with ecosystem. We had to kind of include all as equally valid relationships as well as the inner relationships.
And I love that, because in a way, it's also a declaration about challenging this hierarchy the dominant culture tells us we should have about relationship, right? It's like expressions like, blood is thicker than water, that somehow our family of origin are kind of the most important relationship. But at the same time, that a romantic relationship should be the most important relationships, right? And right now we are seeing more and more every day the very visible impact of climate crisis as well. And we do talk about relationship with the environment, and also how relationship between adults are different in terms of power dynamics than something like a parenting relationship between, parent and child, because, and how culture impacts the way we look at all the ways in which we relate. And there's something about, at the moment, it seems to be really in the air, this topic, because Dean Spade, for example, has got I think it's called Love in a Fucked Up World, is coming out. It's also about relationship. And I'm like, that's great, because I can't wait to read it.
Yeah.
Right.
And I think actually that Sophia, who wrote our forward, is writing, a book about relationships at the moment. Mel Cassidy is doing medical relations.
That's right.
Yeah,
I can't wait to read Mel's book as well.
There's quite a lot of, they're actually all really different, distinct books that do different things. And I think underlying sort of ethics and values quite similar. It feels like people hopefully fairly soon will have a whole raft of stuff that they can go to. We tried to, link to all the ones we're aware of already in this book. It's great to hear there's a few more coming out along these lines.
Oh, yeah. I wasn't aware of Din's book when we were writing this book back in summer of 2023. It was the first book that we wrote in person together since the pandemic, if I'm correct. And and that was an experience too, because we had gone through the pandemic, so many years of not seeing each other physically, although luckily with that, we were able to have some kind of connecting in-person time the year before, but we weren't writing for the first time since 2017.
We tried to have a holiday together. It was wild, wasn't it? It was
it was great.
What do we do with time now?
We swam in the pool, we ate delicious food, and then we couldn't stop ourselves from working. So we also, I think, got our notebook out and started to plan some things. But
I think we might have done,
yeah. And what I love is that I think a lot of us who are educators, healers, community organizers have been really feeling like it is so important for us to be intentional and clear about our relationship value, especially at this moment in time, right? Because capitalism, colonialism are so dehumanizing. And when, part of dehumanization is also this the cracks and the ruptures that creates in our relationships. And we do talk about that in our book. I
feel like that's the framework of the book in a way, is this idea that we're so disconnected on every level, spiritual, cultural, by capitalism, colonialism, then relationally, because people are being brought up in families within that wider culture. And then that means that we're very disconnected internally, whether that's a lot of repressing or a lot of trauma kind of reactivity going on. It's disconnection at every level. So the book's really about, how on earth do we relate when we are kind of disconnected at every level, and also how might we reconnect, also how might we deal with those disconnections when they happen, but also how might we reconnect at any of those levels. But yeah, I agree. There was, oh God, there's so many things I want to say. I suppose, I was just like, I want to say how relational the book was. And I also want to say something about how we'd gone in such radically different directions in our own relating. I don't know which to do first.
Go for it. Whichever one comes out first, go for it.
Well, I suppose it was, you were just saying about, the pandemic, and, this was the first time we'd actually got together to write for a long time that wasn't just online. And then, as we were beginning to write it, we got this hang on a minute, these last few years, you've gone way towards relationships and community, relationships with other human beings and other beings and community, and your spirituality. And I know you're really engaged with relationship with land and water as well, and ancestors. And we'd gone much more into this internal plural relationship with selves, or different parts of the selves or different selves, whatever way you want to say that as, and that was very linked with our spirituality as well. So in some ways overlap, but in some ways radically different approaches, in that, I as a whole was spending a lot of time alone, and you were spending a lot of time in community and with others. And we felt like that was I guess both a challenge and a strength again of the book, right? Is that we were able to deal with that whole gamut, from sort of very solo relating all the way through to very embedded in community relating and everything in between, right?
Absolutely. And I'm thinking about even we had our little personal check-in sometime this month. I don't know what is even time anymore. And it was beautiful us talking about how we had such different winter holidays. Yours were very solo, and mine were full of people. That's right. That 10
really
to 12
shows
people.
A stark difference. I didn't even see people Christmas or New Year, and it was a spiritual retreat time for that whole kind of time. Whereas you were surrounded by, living with loads
family
of people.
Family of origin, queer family of family, And, but it was really interesting that when we were talking, our emotional and inner experiences were very similar. The surface was so different, but then when we dove underneath, right, we were dealing with not so dissimilar issues internally. And I think that's a beautiful example, even though this happened obviously once the book had already been written, but I think it's a theme that you can live very different lives, but kind of really grapple internally with very similar issues, right? Does that make sense?
It just reminded me of that tweet I once saw that somebody, I think a relationship therapist, had said that whether you break up or stay together with a partner, the work that you need to do will be the same. And it is kind of, I definitely feel that along the gamut of people I know in all different kinds of relationships, from the really queer ones to really quite normative ones, and different types of relationships as well. It does feel, or people who are dealing with actual children and people who are dealing with inner children, really similar, there's a lot of, just similar stuff comes up, even when they look, pretty different. I just think there's so many different paths to the same place, but what we get churned up internally will be pretty much the same, whatever.
Exactly. It's almost like we're all human and kind of dealing with a lot of similar issues around belonging, and how do we care for one another without abandoning ourselves, and how how do we stay in relationship when there's competing needs. And what I love about our book is that there are all these tools that no matter if you are monogamous or non-monogamous, like you said, whether you're a parent or not, whether you're ace or not, whether you're kinky or not, hopefully there is something in the book for you to kind of really reflect about, how do I relate to myself, to the ecosystem, to other people, and even to the idea of relationships themselves, right? Even to the idea of relating.
And I hope that really takes the pressure off people for this idea that there's a right way of doing it. I know that for us, whenever we talk with you or with all our friends who are in very different relationship structures and different living situations and different communities, just really helps to be there isn't it's so easy for people to think there's a magic solution, whether it was looking for the one perfect partner or the one perfect way to do relationships or the perfect community. And I think we're really gently challenging of that notion throughout the book. But I just hope people can really feel that sense of like, all that is kind of suffering to be in this. Like, could I be doing it better? Should I be doing it better? Am I doing it the right way? I think, hopefully people can get that sense from how diverse and different our ways of doing relationships are, and the fact it does bring up the same stuff regardless,
And I think what I love about that is that inherently kind of challenges the more kind of colonial white supremacist way of thinking of the right way, right? That to me feels like, and there's so much noise nowadays, and don't get me wrong, there's also like some beautiful, interesting things. I follow a lot of content creators who talk about relationship, and there's so much beautiful content that I found personally helpful. And at the same time, I also really see people struggling with this idea of what is right or what is wrong, right? What is the right relationship? What is the wrong relationship? What is the right way to communicate? What is the wrong way to communicate? And I know as an anxious attacher myself, I often struggle with like, I could do better. I could be better. Let me read just one more relationship book. Let me read just one more research paper about how we can do relationships better. And I know that the most helpful is when I can like, take in all the information, take in all the theories and research, but then like tune it all out and kind of come back to like ground and to self and to just like to what do I know in my bones? What have I experienced and what are my values and how can I align my values with my actions, which is so much more complex than it sounds. And does that make sense? I don't know if you've seen people struggle with that too. Like, I just want to know the right way to do this, or how do I find the right partner? Yeah.
And then, the danger is that gets imposed in relationships, and we talk a lot in the book about, how our trauma patterns can act out with the people in relationship with, or, colonial ways of relating, can come out through us. And, I feel like, again, something we stress in the book is this idea of fit, and getting away from right and wrong ways. And it's actually, how does your neurodivergence work and how does mine, and where's our overlap there, and where are the bits that are going to be challenging, and then what kind of relationship container might we have that enables us to have a nourishing relationship, rather than this kind of almost argument between this is how my neurodivergence does it, this is how mine does, or what are my relationship trauma patterns, what's my cultural background, and what's yours, and finding that overlap and being okay with the difference, finding the way of relating, also finding when it's just not, that's not a very good fit, but it might be a good fit for some kind of relationship, but what's, instead of this idea of like, this kind of relationship is how they should all look, and regardless of how different or similar we are in those kinds of ways, we should, live together and have sex together and all these other things. Much more this kind of conscious and really open sharing, with this idea of there's not a wrong and right here. There's how you work, there's how I work at the moment, which might change. And then, like I guess, we do that all the time, don't we? Like sort of finding our way, with what kind of time together can work, what kind of time online can work, whether we want to be working on a project at the moment or not. And I love, that there's just this permission giving of like, it's about finding where the overlap is, and what's sort of mutually nourishing, rather than some sense of like, oh, because we've got this history, therefore we should do it this way, or because this is the template of, writing collaborators, that somehow we should follow that or something.
Exactly. And what I love is that, obviously we're not the first people to talk about this. Much bigger author than us, like bell hooks, have talked about what does love even mean, right? And what is love? But what I love about our book is that we really try to grapple with some of those questions in practice, and what are some of the practices and exercises and reflections that might help us kind of be more aligned with what our values are, and even how do we uncover what our values are? Because I think we live in a world that tells us like, relationships fall into those boxes and this is how we do it, right? Mm-hmm. And then also this is how you deal, with relationships that might be labeled toxic in air quote, and not to diminish, like as somebody who is a survivor, like not to diminish that there can be terrible abuse that happens in all kind of relationship. But that also like, we can kind of take all of that into account and choose for ourselves as adults, of course, when we have that agency to be like, those are what my values are. This is how I want to relate to other humans. And part of that is that flexibility of knowing that if you care for the people around you, that relationship is going to change. Like even as a parent, I don't have the same relationship with my 21-year-old than I had when she was 5, or with my 14-year-old than I had when he was like 8 years old, right? And we are a great example of that. We started as like colleagues who moved very quickly. I mean, colleagues in the field, not at the same institution. We like met at a conference. We started with a romantic relationship, and here we are. It was actually 20 years since we met when we were writing our book. And we do talk about that in the book. Do you remember that? Yeah. That we met in July 2003 and we wrote the book in July 2023, which was 20 years of our relationship, which I don't even know how to label it, right? Because it's like 20, in next July of this year, it'll be 22 years, right? Because it takes a minute to go from writing to publication. And so, and in those
that's
20
so beautiful
years,
that, we were doing this book 20-year mark. And also it's the last of that kind of series of books that we did together as well. So it's really meaningful. I think our relationship has shifted and changed dramatically. It's got closer and more distant at different times. I love that about it, and I need that about it. Or, it feels for us, as plurally, just essential that things can get closer and further apart. If that's even the right way to describe it, but it's much more like 3, 4, 5 dimensional, right? But that on every dimension it can shift and change over time. And actually the closest relationships are the ones that can do that, because I think you feel safe enough and you've built trust, that is okay.
Exactly. And when I think about my most intimate relationship, which I would count you in between, is there are those relationships where we can be radically honest, even if it can be painful. Like we even revisited, like, we broke up, I think 8 or 9 months into broke up in air quotes, right? Yeah. But like we broke up a romantic and sexual relationship about 8 or 9 months in, back in 2004, right? We got together in 2003. We ended early 2004. We were much younger. I was pregnant when we met. Then I just had a baby. You had a bunch of partners. And then we
far too many partners, Alex. As I think you may well have pointed out at the time.
Sorry. And how it worked when I had no needs, but then the minute I had needs, you were like, no one more person with needs. Which fair, and I might have been attached hormonal. And, but like you said, it's like, but we managed somehow through all of that to keep talking to one another and like to become friends and then collaborators, and that intimacy kind of shifting and deepening, even though, there were changes, and I'm sure there will be more changes, moving forward, because that's life. But I think that sometimes that's what's so hard for people, right? But I like this relationship and I want it to stay exactly as it is. Yeah. And the reality is that most relationships don't stay as they are, but they don't always have the flexibility to kind of hold the changes, which is not really easy.
Yeah, really hard. I mean, that's we're really saying this stuff is the hardest possible stuff. It's so hard when people want you to be something that you can't be. And it's so hard when people can't be what you want them to be, like both the push and the pull, right, of relating, to find that place where you can be, again, this is really Bell Hook's way of loving, isn't it? That, this mutuality, the sense that you're both valuable, and that's what love is, and you're not trying to push the other person away or pull the other person in, and neither are they trying to do that to you. And that's incredibly hard. There's just so often these hooks of kind of, if you want to call it, sort of needy and avoidant, or whatever language you want to use for that. It's really challenging to kind of just, I guess, have the value of like, I'm not going to do that with people and other beings and the land and everything. And then to nurture relationships where that's a sort of shared value, I guess. Yeah.
And I think that, when we talk about, it can sound so like smooth and easy and beautiful, but it's kind of messy. Like,
that's like staying with the worst feelings. Yeah. Like with absolute terror, that you're going to lose somebody, terrible loneliness, complete rage that the person's not being what you want them to be, total shame that you realize that you are wanting somebody to be something they're not, and not actually loving them very well. And I mean, this is absolutely, like you were saying, this is the human stuff. This is what existential philosophers, Buddhist scholars, all these kind of folks have been writing about, because it's so hard, spending, lifetimes writing about this kind of stuff because it's so hard.
Absolutely. And also, sorry about that. We get messy. Like, we say unfortunate things. I mean, we both said things to each other, during our first kind of breakup, let's call it,
Yeah.
And then we have to find our way back to each other, knowing that things that we say when we're not in our best self are not all of who we are, right? Yeah. And in a way that does mean that we need to be radically honest with ourselves and each other, right? Like, hey, that hurt me, or that. And sometimes it can't happen in that moment. Like, it took us, I think, many years to be able to process that in a way that was really like, had enough distance from the rawness of the moment, right? But it can be so helpful because, I know I was like, oh, that's how that impacted me. And you were like, oh, I totally get it. That's where I was. And I was like, oh, that's where I was, right? And in a way, that's how we learn more about ourselves and each other. But I think sometimes when we read things in books, it looks so neat. But the reality is that it's messy. There can be fights. There can be dysregulation. There can be unfortunate things that people say to each other. But somehow, when we're driven by this belief that we can repair, we can, reconnect, the most people are not, and beings are not a threat to us, even, even when it might feel so because of our own trauma, that somehow, right, we manage to find our way back to each other in different ways.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But,
and it can take a lot. And I like that,
that people are like,
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I was just thinking, that it can just take a long time as well. It just is okay to, sometimes it can take a while, or the relationship stuff that comes up can reveal inner work that you need to do before you're able to kind of go towards it. And I guess, like you say, messy, and just that is all right. That is okay.
And I think in a way it asks us to move away from this idea of purity and from purity culture, right? Because it's not about, here are the good people, here are the bad people. If you avoid the bad people, you're only going to be relating to good people, right? And I'm like, that is not how community works. That is not how relationships work, right?
But again, like the right and wrong we were talking about before, I think good and bad, safe and unsafe, I think it's only in recent years, and we're 50 now, that we really got this piece around the same people, all of us are capable of really wonderful, loving things. And all of us, when we're in, a real bad situation, are capable of terrible and really hurtful things. And there isn't an exception to that. And to be able to hold that is one of the hardest jobs of life. But actually, I think relating gets so much better when you can hold the whole of people, whether they're vividly, plural the way we are, or whether it's just more recognizing, everybody's multiplicity and, how they, how even just how you're different when you're got a lot of energy versus when you're really tired, right? It's just people are, people can have much more capacity for loving, relating, sometimes than at others. And different sides of them may have more capacity or less capacity. And people are different places on their journey of self-knowledge and self-kindness as well.
Absolutely. And I love that you mentioned that self-kindness, because I think a lot of us, I know for me, like I brought up with not with that kindness often, and kind of if we are used to motivating ourselves or judging ourselves harshly or treating ourselves harshly, we're likely to also, treat other beings, human and non-humans, kind of more harshly, or to kind of have a lot of judgment. And I mean, I'm a person who judges a lot, so I'm not saying this about other people. I'm I can be pretty judgmental. I know when I start feeling irritated by everybody and everything, I'm oh, okay, Alex, time to take a break and figure out what's going on here internally, because obviously either you're not meeting your needs or you're in a lot of pain. Why are you so crabby with the multiverse right now, right? It's not everybody's against me, like the traffic lights or people, right? Okay, time to slow down and pause and be what is going on internally, and how am I throwing out all these uncomfortable feelings and kind of spraying them all around me, for want of a better word. I don't know. Does that make sense?
Totally. And I think, that's this piece about reconnecting with the self and cultivating self-love, which is really why, we stopped and retreated, 5 years ago, and are still doing that deep inner work, because, there was just so much kind of hate and criticalness in our system. And we've been, really working with the self who's held all of that. That's been one of the really big pieces, because like you were saying about seeing the world as a threat, I think when you can't be kind to yourself, then it is very threatening, and conflict is very threatening, because somebody might say something that just will send you into, way more, we were sort of a sort of knife comes from another person and you turn it into 1,000 knives, and it's absolutely unbearable, right? And so again, they all go together, cultivating kindness at the level of the self and our interpersonal relationships, our relationship with the world, and our spiritual or existential relationship, or whatever you want to call that. I think they're all really connected. And again, just so people don't go too hard on themselves if they're really frightened by conflict, or if they're not able to do rupture and repair. This is stuff we have found incredibly difficult ourselves. And we're really lucky with this relationship that we found a way through. But it's incredibly hard territory.
Yeah, and I think that's the beauty. I know I'm talking about a relationship a lot, but in a way, it's foundational to the book we wrote. We even put that in the introduction, right? Because we are very different people. We were brought up in different countries, different cultures. We have, to some degree, kind of different, similar yet different experiences and identities. And there's places of convergence and divergence. But somehow we've managed to keep this open dialogue between us, right? And this kind of trust that we built with one another in over 20 years of relating, kind of really trusting that we are not trying to hurt the other person. Even when we are hurt, we can say oh, ouch, that's really hurtful. We become more and more skillful as our trust increased, but we could have just as easily walked away and never talked to each other again. And that would have been such a loss. Sometimes I think about it because that has happened with other people where there is a rupture, and sometimes I feel so sad because I'm oh, what could have been if we could just slow down a little bit more and figure out what is happening, right? As long as there is, of course, physical safety, because that physical safety is so important. And of course, emotional safety is also important, but it's a little bit trickier because sometimes we can feel unsafe when we're uncomfortable. I know that is one of the things that can happen a lot under this kind of colonial white supremacist culture, and especially when we're traumatized, am I truly unsafe?
Yeah.
Am I uncomfortable? And sometimes we can also mistake lack of safety for lack of comfort, which is not great, right? And there's so much discernment that it takes to stay in relationship. That is really hard.
Like, it's really hard.
Yeah.
Really hard.
Like,
like you say, it's both ways. It's like we might get, well, we will, and we have definitely had a lot of this over the last few years of like, seeing something as incredibly threatening that's actually not so, but also not noticing that something's really threatening when it is, or just a really bad idea. So I think hopefully the book, offers some guidance of how people can start to tune into themselves and also what kind of support they can get. And there's a lot of kind of people supporting each other with this stuff. I feel like in the last few years, hopefully this understanding of things like trauma and neurodivergence and the way being in this quite violent culture impacts us, that's all got a little more awareness around it. And hopefully this book does help people to sort of like apply that to their relating.
I think what's tricky, in a way, is also that, more and more as we descend into this kind of increasing level of fascism in many different places across the globe, where, and in a way, there's a lot of purity culture within fascism too, right? This is right, this is wrong. This is the truth. This is the, these are the lies, like things being in neat categories. It feels very countercultural in a way to have a book out that's like, look, it's actually, there's so much nuance. There is so much nuance in relating. Like you said, you can feel, you can be in a situation that it's unsafe and not recognize it. And you can be in a situation that is safe but uncomfortable and feel like there's lack of safety there. Like, in a way, we're asking readers to really go on this journey of like nuance, radical honesty with themselves and each other. It is not an easy ask that we do of the readers. In some ways, it does feel like in a world where people want fast answers, we're definitely not giving fast answers in our book about relating, do we?
There's a lot about slow, and I guess that's again what you get in a lot of the trauma work is it can't be done fast. And then, we've really learned that the hard way over here. So and again, like, what does slowing down look like? And I guess we found that the chapters that kind of got really, really big were those ones towards the end about how do we do this sort of slow, conscious, consensual relating. And again, lots of different ways, because it's not going to be the same for everybody. So hopefully there's a lot of tools in there, and also signposts to other people who have great tools for doing this kind of, really emotional embodied work, right?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And what I love is that, like, the slowness is also, it's not necessarily like a steady pace, because we're humans. There are times where we're going to get excited. We're going to fall head over heels in love, right? Like with the place or with the person. And we might make like big choices, and that's not necessarily wrong either. It's just like, it's more of this attitude of like, let's, like, life is going to have a varying pace. And also when we want to be intentional, like, can we take a moment? Can we take a step back? Can we relate a little more slowly? Can we try not to make rash, intense decisions, like, for forever, right? Like, we can be like, okay, I need a little space. Maybe let's take like a few weeks or a moment to, like, does that make sense?
Yeah. And I think it's not so much about speed as, again, as you get to know yourself better, you have a better sense of like, am I in an okay place to do this, or am I likely to go into blame or defensiveness or collapse? And it's like, when you're feeling really grounded, and when you know what that feels like in your body, you're feeling grounded, you're able to be sincere and be present, then you might go quite fast, but when you realize, I'm really edgy right now, or I'm dissociating a bit, or I'm tired, it's kind of like, learning how to put the pause, or, just explore whether something might be communicated slowly in writing, or again, knowing our neurodivergence, knowing our trauma patterns, knowing what just plain works for us and doesn't work for us, and being able to articulate that stuff. And again, then not getting into the purity type idea that, if we tick all those boxes, then it's all going to be great all the time. We're not going to have difficult feelings, because unfortunately those are still going to keep coming. But hopefully we can, weather them a bit differently, perhaps, than when we, instinctively kind of lash out or lash in.
And I think there's a lot to be said about the role of shame as well in relationship, because if we have shame about who we are or how we react, I know for myself, like, I've had to do a lot of work on, like, some of my neurodivergence means that sometimes I have meltdowns. I can lash out, and I want to be accountable, and I want to work on that. And also there needs to be a level of, like, acceptance and not collapsing into shame or hiding, because I don't think that's helpful either. That's actually can cause a lot of actually abusive situation too, especially for like neurodivergent folks who are autistic, for example. I know I dealt with so much shame, and I know other folks have too. And though somehow it's like, well, if I have meltdowns, maybe it's okay that other people are treating me like this, right? Because there's something wrong in air quotes with me, all that internalized sanism and ableism, and what we consider acceptable or not acceptable in dominant culture. And so there is a lot of struggling with like acceptance of our whole self, knowing that, we all have the capacity for good and bad. We all have the capacity for, loving, affirming, relating, and totally like destructive, painful relating. Does that make sense?
Total sense. Yeah. And I feel like, there's such a longing in us, in our system, to get to a point to be able to be with, like you said, to be able to be with discomfort, to be able to be with these hard moments, to be able to be with somebody when they're struggling, when they're melting down, and to be able to be with ourselves. Again, it's so much about not abandoning yourself and not abandoning others. And again, just as we've said a lot of times already on, this is not easy territory. The more, I guess, is the more honest and loving we can be with ourselves, the more able we might be able to be that honest and loving with others. And, let's acknowledge it's a lifelong journey. And it's okay that we get it wrong along the way.
Oh, we're definitely going to get it wrong along the way. I know I'm in my 50s. I got a lot of things wrong. Obviously, I got maybe some things. Well, and that's the struggle. Even moving away from that wrong or right. Like, I have learned, like, I've had, relationships that felt more or less loving. I've had moments in my long-term relationships when I've been more or less loving. I've had moments with you when I've been more or less loving towards you, right? It's like, before we signed on, you were telling me about your T-shirt, which is really awesome.
Oh,
and
my
I was
God,
like, oh yeah, that kind of sums up the book, like you said, right?
So I don't know if you can see, but it says, "Love will keep us together," but it's a reversible T-shirt. So it also says, "Love will tear us apart" on the other side.
And for those of you who are just listening on the podcast, don't worry, we're not doing a show and tell of MJ like turning their T-shirt inside out, so you're not missing out. Although you can absolutely come on YouTube and watch MJ show the T-shirt of "Love will keep us together, love will tear us apart." But I think that's a beautiful paradox, right? That kind of, and that's how I feel even in my love for the ecosystem right now with all this climate crisis, right? I feel like I could spend all day like heartbroken, and I am, but also I look outside and I'm totally in love with where I live, and I'm totally heartbroken, right? But the
this is it, the bothness.
The fires in LA, and exactly.
Yeah, can we hold the bothness? Can we hold how terrible relationships can be, and how wonderful and how mysterious it is, even that some stay together, some break up, and how, can we hold the world at the moment as this, utterly beautiful, magnificent thing, and also this incredibly traumatized and traumatizing thing. It's all of it. And again, I feel like the kind of tools, hopefully, that we're offering the book might help people expand perhaps a little that capacity to hold it all, themselves and others, And again, I think, like you say, comes back to shame, comes back so much to this dominant culture of having to be good, and, this terror of being seen as bad in any way, because of shame. Starts with holding the bothness or the allness in ourselves, and, hopefully expands that offer to others as well.
Absolutely. And I think that's the thing. It's like it is, in a way, relating with the ecosystem, with others. It's also a way of relating to ourselves, right? It's kind of, how do we come to accept the whole of ourselves, right? The parts that we like and the parts we dislike, the parts where we know we can do and create beautiful things, but we can also be destructive and harmful, because we're humans and we have the both ends, right? Both the potential of creating and the potential of destroying, both the potential of loving and the potential for hate, right? And the more we accept that about ourselves, I think the more intentional and conscious we can become in our day-to-day choices.
Yeah. And again, I think, almost like the beautiful and the terrible thing about the times we're living through is they're just holding up a mirror in a way that feels more so than ever before, of like, it's very hard to avoid those facts about the bothness, the capacity that we all have for creation and destruction, because it's just being so starkly revealed in all these different areas all at once.
Yeah, I think we went down this kind of, I think useful rabbit hole in terms of people understanding what they might expect from the book. Maybe they're totally put off and they're like, why would I pick up this book that's not even going to give me answers? But a little while ago, you were like, I have two things I want to talk about. And now I'm like, oh, what was the other thing?
I've still got it. I've still got it. It's unusual, but I managed to hold on to it.
Oh, good.
Which was just how relational the book was, I suppose. And it's kind of maybe a nice place to start rounding up, because obviously we've talked a lot about how it was relational in terms of our relationship, but it was also like held in a much wider relationship. And I suppose, a couple ones I would mention would be our friend Hannah, who put us up in this gorgeous place that Hannah's living. Well, I guess it was the land as well. It was the land and the water. It's like a kind of watermill by a riverside in Galicia. And so, that comes into the book, being in this peaceful location, being able to go and swing in a hammock, Hannah cooking meals for us. So there's so much gratitude there. And then, like Sophia, who wrote the foreword for us, obviously all our different relationships, our whole life that have gone into the book from our kind of early family relationships onwards, right? So, I feel like I guess I always now see everything I do as relational. In the sense now I'm kind of writing as a we, so there's various different selves in here that are contributing more explicitly in this book than ever before, but also it's everybody I've read and everybody I've related with. I've got a friend who started using we when they write, not because they're plural, but because they want to acknowledge that it's just not an I. There is no I. There is, Bell Hooks and Thich Nhat Hanh and, John Wellwood and, I don't know, Pema Chodron and, Audre Lorde. And, there's all these people, whether they'd like, the words that we use that are so influenced by their words or not. We are very influenced by all those people, and equally, I guess, the ones we disagree with, so it's all in there. So it's a very relational book. Does that sort of resonate for you as well, Alex?
Oh my God, it resonates so much, because often We have this illusion of the self, right? Even when I think about Ram Harris' book, The Singular Self, and even this idea, like, what is our singular self? Whether, even if we're not plural, like, are we really a singular self when we bring our ancestors with us, our history? We cannot move out of culture, like we said in kind of past book and other folks have said. And so there is something about colonialism, I think, and white supremacy and patriarchy, I think, that want to feed us this like almost exceptionalism of the self.
Yeah.
And yet when I write, I often feel like I am taking all of this with me. I do have my ancestors with me, my relationship with spirit, my relationship with place. Like you said, this book is the book it is because of the place we were able to write it in, and the way we were held with so much care and love, and the way we're held by community, including the community of readers.
Yes.
We keep choosing to like read our books or recommend our books or pass them on to like other people or use them to teach in their courses, right? There is like this web, like, and again, this is not new from my point of view. This is like most indigenous cultures that I know of talk about like being in deep relationships with one another, right? Yeah. And so for me, that's the beauty of this book, is that we really talk about the ease and complexity of being in a relationship, right? I know that I think I do talk about this in the book at one point, how if I think about romantic relationships, I have a real hard time with the concept of dating, right?
Yes,
because
to
me, it kind of almost denies that we're constantly in relationship. Yeah, like we're constantly in relationship with one another. So, okay, so now we want to explore this aspect of relationship, right? It may work, it might not work just because we're in a relationship. But I think because people think that there are so many expectations, or might even read expectations where there may not be expectations, right? There's just this like undercurrent or weight even to the word relationship.
Yes.
And so when I think about even the title, and maybe that's a good place as well to keep moving towards the end of this conversation. I'm sure we'll have more. Like, even when we think about the term relationships, there is a weight to it. And so I really I would love for the listeners, or if you're watching on YouTube, take a moment to breathe and even notice what comes up for you when you hear the word relationships. I feel like the moment you say the word relationship, there is like a world of values and expectations and beliefs and experiences that kind of crowds the space.
Yes.
Does that make sense?
I think so. There's, just this general theme, I think, of how we tend to, what's the word, like solidify things, just like we tend to solidify people, we were saying it's like good, bad, safe, unsafe. It's easy to kind of solidify a relationship and what it means. And relationships of all kind, I guess, romantic relationships particularly have that, like, I'm in a relationship, and it comes burdened with a lot of expectations and stories. But I think, it's so easy to do that. So something about the kind of relating as kind of something fluid that we do over time feels a little looser, perhaps.
Yeah, and I think what I love about what we do in the book is that we do kind of deconstruct this concept. So that even when we say like, I want more intimacy in my relationship, it's like, well, what does that mean?
Yeah.
Right? What kind of intimacy? I think at this point I have like 17 different types of intimacy.
Oh, I love your
in the intimacy assessment.
Scale,
I want to make it to a zine as well. And also it's like the different parts of us, whether we're singlet or plural, have different needs when we're relating, and even in different moments, like just being able to have that self and other acceptance, if there is even a separation between self and other, of course, because if we're all part of the web, what impacts somebody else impacts me, and what impacts me impacts somebody else. And for me, that's the beauty of relating, is that interdependence, right? It's like, it's challenging the myth of independence, which serves capitalism, is so colonial, right? And really move towards this much more indigenous concept of interdependence, right? That I think is central to many indigenous movements, is central to disability justice, like this idea that if we're all part of the web, we are interdependent. We depend on each other for survival, and so relating is inevitable in some way.
Yeah, exactly.
That sounds very doom and gloom. Relating is inevitable. So you better get our book, How to Understand Your Relationships, to know how to do it better. Look at me. Like I can sum it up in a sound bite.
Relating is inevitable. I love it. Yeah, totally. But yeah, that we're so, again, it goes back to what we said right at the start. It's every level tries to kind of disconnect us from others, which is why it gets so painful, because we get very much like we are this separate object, and the other, whoever the other is a separate object, this kind of us and them, self and other. And it's a long, long journey to this reconnection that is so vital, for the planet, for, wider conflict, for pretty much everything we're facing. It's so funny, like I'm saying this and there's a little thing going around on the computer saying reconnecting.
It's like even the internet is like relating is hard right now. I'm trying to relay you across like oceans. Like give me a minute. Like be compassionate.
Yeah, that's what we need. Reconnected.
So that is what we need, reconnection, both on the internet, which I hope we are connected enough for recording this episode, but also reconnecting with ourselves, the ecosystem, and with one another, because relating is inevitable. There you go. This is my doom mantra, and God, let's be less culturally appropriative. My leading phrase for 2025.
Love it. Love it.
So at the end of the episode, I always ask, is there anything that we haven't talked about that you were hoping we would talk about? So I'm going to ask us both these questions in this dialogue. Is there anything we haven't talked about that we were hoping to talk about?
Only that also, do look out for Alex's excellent edited collection on trans and disability, which is just absolutely wonderful from what we've read so far. And hopefully you'll get to do a whole episode on that specifically. But you've got the two books out, and I think we really want to recognise that. And they're both really important, and lots of really interesting overlaps between the two as well.
Oh, thank you. That is really kind. And I'm excited to see what happens next to our writing partnership, because for the first time in several years, we don't have a project that we're doing together, but I know that we are relating to one another. And other projects are slowly emerging. And I'm sure at some point we'll find that beautiful overlap of your interests with my interests. And we'll get to nerd out and write another book. Yeah. And in the meantime, we just get to enjoy relating without writing for a minute.
And maybe supporting each other with our separate projects as well. Like, that just feels beautiful to me. We do that a lot anyway, but in a way, not having a specific us project maybe frees up the possibility for sort of doing other kinds of support of each other's creativity, which I'd really enjoy.
Absolutely. I think that's one of the beautiful things in our relating, is that we do support each other, relating to other people, relating to writing, creative projects. So I'm really looking forward to see what happens next for both of us, separately and in our kind of beautiful partnership, which continues and changes and flows with time. Oh, and so thank you so much, MJ, for the beautiful time we got to spend together today. And to all of you wonderful Gender Stories listeners, would love and appreciate if you get a copy of How to Understand Your Relationships and or of the anthology Trans and Disabled. They're both published by Jessica Kingsley, and watch the space for all the other beautiful projects that MJ and I are kind of involved in, and we'll let you know about in due course. And until then, I hope that your relating is full of healing, spaciousness, growth, beauty, and joy. And until then,